A surprise gesture by Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev has sparked cautious optimism about the future of Azerbaijan-France relations. On May 27, Aliyev pardoned French national Théo Clerc, who had been convicted of hooliganism for spray painting graffiti on a Baku metro train in March 2024. He had then received a 3-year sentence after the court's decision. The sign's rapprochement, however, came shortly after a reportedly warm meeting between Presidents Aliyev and Emmanuel Macron at the European Political Community Summit in Tirana, Albania. While symbolic, the pardon raises a serious question. Could this be the beginning of a real diplomatic reset between Baku and Paris? Or is it simply a tactical pause in a longer confrontation? To better understand the depth of the current dynamic, Azer News spoke with 2 renowned political analysts. Tural Ismailov, political scientist and sector director at the Center for Social Research in Baku, remains skeptical about the long-term prospects of normalization.
Ümumiyyətlə, Azərbaycanla Fransa arasındakı münasibətlərin gərginləşməyinin səbəbkarı heç vaxt Azərbaycan olmayıbdır. Fransa 30 il ərzində Azərbaycan torpaqlarını işğal altında saxlayan Ermənistanın ən böyük havadarlarından biri olub və ATƏT-in Minsk qrupunun üzvü olarkən də həmişə bu təxribatçı, bir yanlı, birbaşa işğalçı Ermənistanın mövqelərini müdafiə edən siyasi xətti davam etdiribdir və 44 günlük Vətən müharibəsindən sonra Azərbaycan torpaqlarını işğaldan azad etdi. Bundan sonra da Fransanın Azərbaycana qarşı qeyri-səmimi və eyni zamanda işğalı körükləyən, tətikləyən münasibəti daha da davamlı oldu və eyni zamanda Fransa bütün beynəlxalq münasibətlər və beynəlxalq hüquq prinsiplərini tapdalayaraq hər zaman qeyri-adekvat siyasət həyata keçiribdir. Lakin hər bir halda Avropa Siyasi Birliyinin sonuncu iclasında gördük ki, Fransa prezidenti Emmanuel Macron Azərbaycan prezidenti İlham Aliyevə yaxınlaşmağa çalışır, onunla söhbət etmək istəyir. Əlbəttə ki, Fransa ilə Azərbaycan arasında doğrudan da diplomatik mənada Fransanın səhvlərinə görə ciddi problemlər müşahidə olunur. Gərginliyin səviyyəsi kifayət qədər yüksəkdir və bu baxımdan da münasibətlərin qısa bir zamanda tamamilə kökündən həll edilməsi, müsbətə doğru dəyişikliklərin əldə edilməsi çox çətindir. Özəlliklə Fransa Xarici İşlər Naziri Jean-Noël Barronun İrəvanda sonuncu verdiyi açıqlamalar da onu göstərir ki, Fransanın siyasi elitasında doğrudan da Cənubi Qafqaz regionuna yanaşmada çox qeyri-rasional təfəkkürə malik olan adamlar təmsil olunur. Hər bir halda Fransanın hazırki xətti və mövqeləri dəyişmədikcə Azərbaycanla Fransa arasındakı münasibətlərdə pozitiv və köklü dəyişikliklərin mən müşahidə olunacağını düşünmürəm.
Neil Watson, a British journalist and political analyst, on the other hand, struck a more optimistic tone, calling the pardon a potential turning point.
Well, I think we are actually on the cusp of a breakthrough in the very, very frosty bilateral relationship between Azerbaijan and France. And this has existed for approximately 5 years, really since the events of 2015 and the start of the events that led up to the Second Karabakh War. And since that time, we've seen France very much supporting Armenia, largely due to the Franco-Armenian community, the diaspora, but also because France very much views potentially Armenia as being its outpost in the South Caucasus and also in the post-Soviet space. And we've seen lots of very unhelpful statements being made by President Macron and indeed others in the French government in support of Armenia and to the detriment of Azerbaijan. So the situation has been extremely difficult between the countries. And of course, Azerbaijan has responded like terms, very much it's reciprocated and has made very strong statements against France, in particular in relation to its approach towards neo-colonialism. So I think we're talking a breakthrough now because yesterday it was announced that in President Aliyev's annual statement regarding the pardoning of prisoners and reductions of sentences after due consideration, he has actually decided to release French national Théo Clerc who was arrested just over 1 year ago in March 2024, alongside other nationals from New Zealand and Australia for spray painting with graffiti a metro train in Baku. Now, this isn't a particularly pleasant thing to do, but nonetheless, the sentence that was meted out to Mr. Clerc was quite draconian. It was a 3-year sentence he was given, whereas his other graffiti artists were released with a fine. And I believe that this signals to President Macron and those in the French hierarchy that things are starting to change. Certainly, the fact he was detained for such a long period of time, merely on a charge of hooliganism, was very much reflecting the very difficult political climate between the countries. And I understand that recently President Macron and President Aliyev had a good meeting on the sidelines of the European Political Summit in Albania. So this is indicative that things are definitely changing. And I think that there are many reasons behind this. First of all, we have no doubt that France has supported Armenia very strongly, even offering military assistance. And this has been to placate the sizable Armenian diaspora in France, who in themselves are very, very supportive of the Armenian occupation of Azerbaijani territories for 30 years. And also France viewed it that Armenia would be its outpost. Now France realises that the peace treaty, the peace talks that have been taking place since the dissolution of the OASC Minsk group, and indeed there have been further attempts from Armenia to involve France in the negotiations as a third party. Now that the talks are bilateral, it does seem that actually France's involvement is completely irrelevant. France can be no part of these peace talks. And seemingly, from the statements being made by Prime Minister Pashinyan, it seems that the necessary adjustments are going to be made regarding the miatsum clauses in the Armenian constitution that will enable a peace treaty to actually take place on a purely bilateral level. So there is no reason for France to involve itself. In fact, the game is up for France. It realises that it cannot have Armenia as its satellite. So also France recognises that it's very important to have a homogeneous, coherent South Caucasus. And of course, the South Caucasus is becoming increasingly relevant to Europe, not least because of the Southern Gas Corridor, but also the Middle Corridor and other initiatives that are taking place, which are set to benefit Europe at a time of great problems, great strife in the world, not least because of the Russia-Ukrainian conflict. So it realises that a homogeneous South Caucasus, where Azerbaijan is the leading player, is extremely important at this moment in time. The fact is that also Azerbaijan, certainly since the disaster of the 25th of December last year, when the Azal airliner was shot down by mistake as collateral damage during the Russia-Ukrainian conflict, the relationship between Azerbaijan and Russia has been very difficult, and it realises that France recognises that Azerbaijan is very staunchly behind Ukraine and the normalisation of the situation in that country. And at the moment, France is very much pushing for a pan-European army to be set up, where France indeed will play the dominant role, not least because it has its own nuclear arsenal. So in many ways, President Macron recognises in President Aliyev and Azerbaijan he has an ally that could help him in the future, if indeed some pan-European army had to be established. So he realises that there is a great deal of more relevance of Azerbaijan to France and indeed to the whole of the EU going forward. And then the other thing is that, of course, that President Aliyev himself has to be seen to be strong on the world stage. There is no doubt that Armenia itself has been too staunchly behind Armenia for, well, really since 1915, but certainly during the last 5 years, things have got very difficult. President Aliyev now, realises there's no danger of France trying to involve itself and trying to inveigle itself into the peace talks between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And in fact, in many ways, he doesn't need to be seen to have an enemy in the EU, particularly when that's the leading country in the EU. He wants Azerbaijan to be seen to be a peaceful country, a tolerant country, which indeed it is. And he realises that there's a lot to gain from having normalised relations with France going forward, and there's no need to be seen to be at diplomatic war with a country to prove his own strength as a political leader. I think everybody recognises President Aliyev's standing in the international arena these days. So those are my thoughts on the reasons behind the seeming rapprochement in the relations between Azerbaijan and France. And let us hope that this continues and that this difficult relationship comes to an end and there can be normalisation going forward with both countries ultimately benefiting. Thank you.